Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about sugar, but not in the way it is usually talked about. Not the calorie count. Not the insulin spike in isolation. Not the simplistic message that sugar is bad and you should eat less of it. I want to talk about the specific, documented, often invisible mechanisms through which habitual sugar consumption affects systems that most people never connect to what they eat: the gut barrier, the microbiome, the hormonal environment, the immune system, and the brain. Because once you understand what sugar is actually doing at those levels, the conversation changes from one about willpower to one about biology. And that change matters. Let me start with the one that most directly shapes every other consequence: what sugar does to the gut microbiome. Your gut contains trillions of microorganisms that exist in a dynamic, competitive ecological balance. Different bacterial species feed on different substrates. Some thrive on the complex fermentable fibers found in whole plant foods. Some thrive on simpler sugars. And when dietary patterns shift toward higher refined sugar intake, the ecological balance shifts with them, favoring the populations adapted to simple sugar metabolism at the expense of the diverse, fiber-dependent populations that perform the regulatory functions the gut depends on. The second mechanism is the gut barrier, and this is the one that connects sugar's effects to the rest of the body most directly. The intestinal epithelium, the single-cell thick lining that separates your gut contents from systemic circulation, is maintained by a combination of structural proteins, nutritional inputs, and the metabolic activity of the beneficial gut bacteria I just described. When those bacteria are depleted by high sugar intake and their short-chain fatty acid production falls, the gut lining loses one of its primary maintenance substrates. Butyrate, the primary fuel for intestinal epithelial cells and the strongest nutritional regulator of tight junction protein expression, decreases as the butyrate-producing bacterial populations decline. At the same time, high fructose consumption, which represents approximately half of the sucrose in most added sugar sources, has been shown to directly disrupt tight junction protein expression through mechanisms independent of the microbiome. According to research, fructose at concentrations produced by typical daily consumption activates specific signaling pathways in intestinal cells that downregulate claudin-1 and occludin-2 proteins essential for maintaining the seals between gut cells. In one study, fructose exposure in intestinal cell models produced measurable disruption of tight junction architecture within 24 hours at concentrations consistent with moderate daily sugar consumption, not extreme intake. The gut lining does not fail dramatically. It loosens gradually, and as it loosens, bacterial byproducts enter systemic circulation, activating a low-grade immune response that the body cannot resolve as long as the gut remains permeable and the dietary input driving that permeability continues. The third mechanism is the one most people associate most immediately with sugar, blood glucose dynamics, but I want to approach it from an angle that is almost never discussed in standard dietary conversations: the effect of glucose volatility on the gut-brain signaling axis specifically. It is well established that blood sugar spikes and drops produce energy volatility, irritability, and cognitive impairment. What is less established in popular understanding is that this glucose volatility produces direct effects on gut motility, gut barrier function, and the composition of the gut microbiome that are independent of and additional to the direct metabolic effects of the glucose spike. The fourth mechanism is the immune consequence, and this one is the most far-reaching. When gut permeability increases and bacterial lipopolysaccharides enter systemic circulation, the immune system activates a response that, in the context of chronic exposure, becomes chronic low-grade inflammation. This inflammation is not confined to the gut. It travels. And refined sugar consumption amplifies this process through a second, independent pathway: the direct suppression of neutrophil activity. The immune system is being suppressed at the moment it is being asked to do more. And this pattern, repeated multiple times per day, every day, means the immune system is chronically operating between competence and compromise. The fifth mechanism is the brain, and specifically the dopamine reward circuit, which refined sugar interacts with in ways that the neuroscience literature is increasingly clear about. Refined sugar activates the dopamine reward pathway in a manner that shares features with other reinforcing substances, producing a rapid dopamine release that reinforces the seeking behavior and creates conditioned associations between environmental cues and the reward. Over time, repeated activation of this pathway requires higher inputs to produce the same response, a phenomenon called tolerance, while simultaneously reducing the dopamine baseline so that the absence of the reward feels worse than the neutral state before the reward was introduced. Sugar does not damage the body in one way. It damages it in 5 simultaneous ways, each of which compounds the others. The microbiome disruption reduces the gut barrier maintenance. The gut barrier deterioration increases systemic inflammation. The systemic inflammation impairs the immune function that would otherwise contain the inflammatory response. The glucose volatility disrupts gut-brain signaling and motility. And the dopamine circuit activation, mediated by the very microbiome that the sugar is depleting, sustains the pattern that drives all of the above. This is not a willpower failure. It is a biological cascade, one that is initiated quickly, that deepens with repetition, and that is designed to sustain itself. Understanding it is the beginning of interrupting it. I hope this gave you a significantly more complete picture of what is actually happening when sugar enters your body. Drop a comment and tell me which of these mechanisms surprised you most. I read all of them. If this was useful, hit the like button and share it with someone who understands that sugar is bad but has never understood why at this level. And if you are new to Nutriflow, subscribe and hit the bell. This is exactly what we do here. See you in the next one.